Welcome back to House of Hollingsworth. I'm Kate, and this week we'll be working on one of my favourite types of furniture, the Singer sewing table. Let me show you what it's like on up close. So there's a lot of wear and tear to the original finish, and there's quite a few deep scratches that I'm hoping I can pop out. But most importantly, all of the wooden decals are still there. All of the handles are still there. Now, when you open it up, normally the sewing machine would be in there, and you'd open this up and pull it out, and then it sits in there. Now, for this piece, we're not going to have a sewing machine that lives inside the machine. So my client wants me to put a piece of timber here to fill in the gap so that sometimes the table can be closed up like that, but when she wants to do some sewing, she can open it up and get her sewing machine out of storage and pop it on there. Now, we also want the option to be able to put an original Singer machine in here at a later date. So I'm not going to permanently close this. I want an easily removable piece that goes in here. So not only am I going to be refinishing this throughout, but I'm also going to be adding another piece to it to close this top off that can be removable at a later date. So the very first thing I'm going to do is take every single piece of it apart. I start by taking all the drawers out and numbering them. It's a really good habit to get in to number your drawers as you take them out, because not all drawers are created equal. So it'll be so much easier to put them back in if they have numbers on them. And then I take off all of the hardware and I put it into my trusty yogurt tub. Singer machine tables are quite easy to take apart. There's a lot of screws, but like you can see, everything just screws off, and then you can take each piece of wood off so that you can work on the wooden components separately. I usually start with the table upright like this, and I take off all of the top pieces that I can reach, and then I flip the table upside down like this, and then I take off all of the bottom parts and the legs. Once I've got all of the pieces apart, I will wash all of the wooden pieces with soapy water just to get rid of years of crud and build up before I start any kind of work on the piece. And then I'm creating some little cleats, I guess, out of scrap blocks. And I had misplaced my countersink drill bit, so I'm just using a spade bit there. These pieces are going to hold the new little table insert that I will build later. This piece here had started to fall apart, so I cleaned out the little groove where it should be sitting and added more glue and clamped it in place until it had dried, and then I could go ahead and clean it and strip it. And now we're on to stripping the piece. So I had done a test patch with methylated spirits and found that it was stripping nicely. So then I went ahead, poured a decent amount of methylated spirits into, yes, another yogurt tub, and then I'm using super fine steel wool to scrub the old shellac finish off. So you want to do a little section, scrub it on, and then wipe it up immediately with paper towel before it dries. If it dries, the shellac will reset. So you want to do multiple coats of scrubbing on the methylated spirits and then wiping off the dissolved shellac. I ended up doing repairs as I was stripping, so stripping the old shellac finish off sort of highlighted any areas that needed to be fixed as I went. So it was a little bit awkward of me both gluing and clamping and stripping at the same time, but I really wanted to get on with it. So as you can see, the glue is still setting up while I'm stripping this piece. But but it's totally fine. By the time I took the clamp off, it was held in place nicely. So again, it's not uncommon for me to do like 4 or 5 rounds of stripping and wiping on the same piece, because it seems to take off the shellac in layers. Layer upon layer will come off, and you have to wipe it up while it's still wet. So to strip a piece this size, I would probably go through about 2 litres of methylated spirits and 2 full rolls of paper towel and about 1/4 of a roll of superfine steel wool. It definitely makes a lot of mess because you're splattering shellac everywhere. So if you're not doing it in a designated space that you can be really messy in, you will want to put down either a plastic drop sheet or a tarp or something, because it goes everywhere. But having said that, it's really easy to clean up, because if you get shellac on something, you just need to redissolve it with methylated spirits again. So you can clean all of your area with methylated spirits afterwards and wipe it up with paper towel if you wanted to. Obviously, I'm working on my workbench here, I don't care. Now we've gotten to a piece that is coming loose. This is really common as well with these wooden like decal parts. They often come loose, and so just squeeze some glue in there and pump it like open and closed a bit so that it wicks the glue up inside of it. You could also use a syringe if you have one, and then just clamp it until the glue has set. Here's another bit that needs to be clamped. It's a bit of a bad angle, I'm sorry. I put glue into this tiny little drawer and then tried to clamp it, but my clamp wasn't big enough and strong enough to hold it. So I gave it another couple of tries with my finger to make sure that yes, it really can close the gap, and then I got a bigger clamp that closed it nicely. There were a couple of spots here where the wood has just broken off, and if I had some strips of solid oak, I probably would have remade those 2 pieces out of solid wood, but I just didn't have anything like it. So I'm going to go ahead and patch it and then paint it. So I'm just clamping a straight edge inside the profile there so that it'll make it easier when I fill it to create that straight edge there. And now I'm using Builder's Bog. I'm just mixing up a little batch at a time. It's a 2-part epoxy, so you add a little dash of that red part and mix it together, and then you only have a few seconds up to a minute of working time before it sets hard. So I try to overfill because it's easily sandable, so I don't mind if I have lots to sand off. I just want to make sure that it's filled. So then after a few minutes I can take the straight edges off, and then I'm using my Azito detail sander to sand the excess off so that it's flat with the surrounding timber. Don't worry that these patches are going to stick out like a sore thumb, because obviously I will blend the colour in afterwards. Also, if you don't have an orbital sander, you can just use sandpaper and a block. There was a little air bubble in it, so now I'm using some Timbermate wood putty to fill that little air bubble so that I've got a nice smooth surface to work with. I just used the wood filler because it was a tiny little spot, and this dries quickly and is easily sandable, so it was just easier to use this than to whip up another batch of the Builder's Bog. Oh my goodness, this scratch gave me so much trouble. Okay, so I was hoping that this scratch was actually a dent, because when wood gets dented, you can pop it back out by wetting it and heating it. So I started by wetting it with a wet cloth and heating it up with a soldering iron, because if you're doing a tiny little indent, you can often pop it out with a soldering iron.
but I quickly got discouraged by doing that. It just wasn't working fast enough. So then I went inside and got my actual iron. Don't worry, I very rarely iron clothes, so this is a better use for it anyway. I did so many rounds of wetting and then ironing, and I just couldn't get it all the way out. So then I gently sanded it to try and diminish the look of it, and it was better but not perfect. I'm so disappointed that I couldn't get it perfect. But never mind, moving on. So now I'm going to fill in this gap with an insert. So I started with tracing out a paper template, and I cut that out with scissors. And then I'm actually going to use an old IKEA door as my wooden insert. So I use the paper template to trace onto this old pine IKEA door. And then I'm using my jigsaw to cut it out roughly to size, and then we'll see if it fits. Now there is a lip on the table that this insert has to fit over, so I'm using my cordless router and I've clamped a straight edge, and I'm just sort of eyeballing it to take off a little bit at a time, so that I've got this sort of rebated edge bit. So I did a couple of passes because I don't like to force out a lot of material in one pass. I feel much safer doing shallow passes. And then once I'd cut out this little lip area, I can then do a dry fit.
Okay, so here's our insert piece, and I have a couple of pieces of spare oak veneer that came off a Singer sewing table originally. So I'm just going to glue these onto here, and I'm going to use contact adhesive. Okay, so what we do with contact adhesive is we put it on both pieces and then press them together once they're dry. So you want to put a nice big layer on the top of this piece, and then you want to put a nice thick layer on the veneer as well. Now that it's touch dry, I'm going to go ahead and put a second coat on any of the areas that they look like they need a little bit more, and then I'll wait for it to be touch dry again. It honestly only takes like maybe 2 minutes to dry, so it's not long at all. When I'm gluing little pieces of veneer on, I don't bother doing the second coat. It's only when I'm gluing up quite a big piece of veneer that I like to double up the amount of glue. And then, oh no, this spot needs a little tiny bit more. Okay, it's time.
Contact adhesive is not like normal glue. It's a type of glue that sticks to itself. So once these two pieces touch, they're stuck, and it's almost impossible to move it. So I always like to start at one side and just sort of press it along. I don't know if you can see properly, but I'm still kind of lifting one end up so that it's not touching, and I start pressing at one side and pressing it firm until I get to the other side, because as soon as it touches the other sticky layer, it's stuck. You can't shift it anywhere.
Now I'm getting a little piece of wood with a sort of a soft edge. It's a soft wood with a round over edge. And I'll just press down so that I press out any air bubbles. Okay. That's good. Now I'm going to get my Stanley knife and cut away all of this excess. Okay, not bad. Now I'm going to sand the edges. You could also use a flush bit on your router, but it's so easy to sand veneer. Okay, it's been sanded so it's smooth. We've still got a few little gaps to fill here with wood putty, but because it's such a hot day today, I can feel a little bit of give in the glue. Like the glue hasn't set as quickly as it normally does. So I'm just going to pop a piece of wood over the top and some bricks just to weight it down while the glue actually sets.
The corner of the veneer was chipped off a little bit here, and it's quite hard to make an oddly shaped patch of veneer, so it's easier if you can just cut a straight line across it somewhere and take that piece off completely and then glue along that straight line and then round it off after the glue's dried. And then I use baking paper so that the glue doesn't also stick to the clamp. Once I'd finished fixing and stripping and hand sanding, then I went through and filled in any minor imperfections with Timbermate wood filler. This is a really soft filler. It dries quickly, it's easily sandable, and it comes in a range of colours, so it's easy to kind of colour match to the timber that you're working with. I sanded back the excess just with a sanding block, and that's what it looks like. And then I'm going to seal the timber with a few coats of wipe-on poly. This is a really easy sealant to use. It's oil-based, and you just wipe on multiple coats, leaving adequate dry time in between. Yeah, like I said, it's really easy to use, and it's a beginner-friendly kind of sealant. Now, in this spot here, that weird patch is builder's bog. So when you put the wipe-on poly over wood filler, it kind of changes colour just like the wood does as it darkens a little. But with the builder's bog, we're going to have to cover that. So don't panic that that looks wildly different. We're going to get to that in a minute. I'm working inside in the aircon at this point, so I had opened the doors so that I could get some airflow in because the oil-based sealant is quite stinky. but yeah, it was just too hot in the shed, so that's why I'm working at my kitchen table and just hoping that we don't all inhale too many fumes. I love how the wipe-on poly just brings out the colour and the grain and everything. Like it's so instantly satisfying. Here's that big scratch. It's almost disappeared, but I mean, you can still see it. I'm still disappointed by it. Okay, so here's where I am covering up this Builder's Bog patch. I'm using blending crayons, and the trick to it is to use multiple colours. So just put some kind of a base colour on and smudge it in with your finger, and then build up layer upon layer of colours until it looks about right. Finally, let's turn our attention to the base. I got rid of all the cobwebs and any flaky bits, and I gave it a good hose down with water and let it dry completely. Then I'm going to be giving everything a nice thick coat of Rustbuster. I just pour a bit into a container and then brush it on. Don't brush it directly from the bottle, because if you double dip into the bottle, then you're transferring some rust into the bottle, and then all of the liquid in the bottle will start reacting, and it will kind of go off, like it will have done its reaction. So decant a little bit into, of course, a yogurt tub, and brush it on. I brush a nice thick layer on all over, whether it's rusty or not, and this is going to cause a reaction that gets rid of the rust essentially. And you just leave it on and let it dry, and then you can come back and buff off any excess with like a dry towel kind of thing, and most of the time just a coat of Rustbuster will be enough. Like it will look almost brand new again. While the Rustbuster is working its magic, I'm going to soak all of the hardware in white vinegar. This is meant to be white vinegar, it's just that I reuse it again and again, so the vinegar has had things soaking in it before, and then I tip it back into the same bottle. The Rustbuster has worked its magic beautifully. It's looking nice and black and fresh. There's just a couple of spots where the original finish has worn off completely, so I'm going to touch them up with a bit of spray paint. And then to add a little bit of drama, I'm coating the Singer insignia with some gold Rub and Buff. Rub and Buff it has a beautiful luster to it. It's almost like gold foil. So I'm going to coat just the Singer letters in gold, and then I'll do a couple of quick coats of spray enamel just to seal it in. Rub and Buff is such a magical product. It sticks to almost anything, and it is so shiny. I love it. We're on to draw liners. Now, normally I cut my draw liners a little bit too big and I stick it on and then I cut off the excess with a Stanley knife. But when you're putting drawer liners in Singer drawers, because they're so narrow, you can't get a knife in properly at the front and back sections, so it's almost impossible to cut them to size once they're in. So for these ones, I just cut exactly the size that I needed and tried to stick it as perfectly as I could. The bobbin drawer was especially kind of grotty, so I added little tiny drawer liners to the bobbin drawer as well, and this is honestly just the sweetest little touch. I love it. So let's just remember where we started. It was pretty grubby, it was grotty, it was cobwebby, it was dusty, it was rusty, it was musty. It was a fair bit of work, but oh my goodness, look at it now. Isn't she beautiful? I honestly never get tired of doing up Singer sewing machine tables. They're just always so rewarding. The timber is always, always beautiful. It's always got beautiful grain on it. I have done a number of different variations of Singer sewing tables, and I've loved every single one of them. I hope you enjoyed this Singer sewing table restoration. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.